Hey there, it's John from Living the Music. Today we're talking about a song from John Lennon's Mind Games. We're looking at I Know, I Know. I'm fascinated by this song because it appears to be written to Paul McCartney. I'm not 100% sure on that. I don't know if anybody is, but there is evidence that speaks to that, which we're going to go over in this video. You tell me what you think in the comments below. Let's take a look. Now, part of what spurs me to this is this great book which came out last year by Ian Leslie, John and Paul, A Love Story in Songs. Fantastic read. Really deep dive into their relationship. Very sympathetic take on it and very insightful take. And he goes through a lot of songs where there's a back and forth, whether they're giving direct messages or they're just somehow indirectly, their relationship is referenced somehow strongly in the songs, whether it's in the words or the way the songs are put together or the way they perform them together. Really powerful deep dive into their relationship here. One of the best Beatle books I've read in a long time. Now, he only quickly touches on this song, I Know, but he does believe it was written to Paul. One of his piece of evidence is the opening guitar lick, the finger picking figure that is played is very reminiscent of I Got a Feeling, that lick that opens up I Got a Feeling, the Beatles song from Let It Be. And Ian says that was the last sort of 50-50 co-write between John and Paul. So he thinks that's no accident that John is referencing that with this song, which Ian believes was written to Paul. There's a couple of other interesting lyrical connections which seem highly suspiciously directly related to Paul McCartney, which we'll get to as we go over these lyrics. Now, with the release of the Mind Games box set a year or so ago, it has been shown for sure that Yoko was at those sessions for this album. So it is possible that this song or parts of this song are related to John's feelings for Yoko at that time. There she is on the album cover there. That could be interpreted as John walking away from her, but not necessarily. In any case, just to give some backstory on their relationship, John basically embarrassed Yoko by having sex with somebody at a party, and Yoko pretty much soon after that kicked him out of the New York apartment, or basically told him, you need to go off and be by yourself for a while. And she asked her assistant May Pang to go with John and keep him company, and whatever, this is hippie days, and Yoko would check in with May and all of that, and she would give her intel about John. But May and John formed a strong relationship too, a strong romantic relationship. So at some point after this album was released, he moves back in with Yoko, but not at the time of this recording, although, as I say, they must have had at least a good working relationship, because she was present at almost all of the sessions for this album. So just to be clear on all the bases here, parts of this song or all of it could be written to Yoko, it could be written to May Pang, and I think in a way it could be written to Julian also, because it is somewhat of a song of apology, and John, I think, did feel some guilt for not spending enough time with Julian in his formative years. And then there's the Paul McCartney aspect. Now, we're going to run with the Paul McCartney possibility here because, well, it's a lot of fun to do so. And I have to say, I'm getting more and more convinced that that's the main thrust of the song. It's surprising, as you'll see when we go through the lyrics, because it's rather a heartfelt statement to somebody. And if it indeed is to Paul, it was quite uncharacteristic of John to be so effusive as he is in this song. By the way, just to put it all out there, when John was asked about this song at some point, he just said it's a, just sort of a piece of nonsense, a piece of garbage that he wrote. It didn't mean anything to him. But you listen to the song yourself. I'll put it down in the comments below, a link for it. It's hard not to listen to this and feel the heartfelt nature of it and feel his sincerity. He's just seems to really be focused and present here, very careful with his singing and just the whole dynamic of the arrangement is very meticulous. So I think we all know John would say one thing one day and one thing another, and he didn't always mean what he said sometimes. So take that the big grain of salt. Okay. Now, to just touch on the John and Paul relationship at this time. So the Beatles have broken up in 1970. Paul releases his McCartney album. John calls that album in public rubbish. That rubs Paul the wrong way, as you can imagine. A year later, he comes out with Ram. He puts a dig into John with the song Too Many People. He critiques their politics, John and Yoko. And he also directly takes on John. He says, "You took your lucky break and broke it in two. Now what can be done for you?" That had to set John off pretty strongly. Then Paul also wrote a song called Dear Friend, which appears on Wildlife. Now, this gets a little bit confusing, but Dear Friend was written and recorded next in this sequence after Ram. And I don't know if he's sort of time is healing or he's softening, but in this song it's more of an overture to John, a peace offering. It still has some lingering resentment in it, but I guess he's trying to say, can we find a way to reconcile? I did another video on that song, which you can find in my list of videos. Now, John comes back after listening to Ram. He hadn't heard this Dear Friend yet. And he does How Do You Sleep on the Imagine album. And this is a big attack on Paul, going after his artistic integrity, saying that his music is music to my ears, and you haven't done anything since yesterday. You're just another day since you left me, things like that. So that's where things stood. Now, meanwhile, what's going on in the background also is the Alan Klein situation with the Beatles is running its course. So as you know, Paul never was down with Alan Klein being the manager of the Beatles. The other three signed with him. Big conflict. Paul eventually sues the Beatles in order to break the partnership so he doesn't have to have anything to do with what Alan Klein is up to over there. And that's a whole, big, legal and personal mess. But by 73, John, George, and Ringo are losing their faith in Alan Klein, and eventually they don't renew his contract. They let him go. So I think that's part of the undercurrent here of what could lead to this really warm song that John potentially wrote to Paul. All right. Now, getting into these lyrics, I love these lyrics. Just overall, I think they're fantastic, and the way they fit in with the melody is perfect too. Just love this. This song and Out the Blue are my favorites by far on this album, along with the title track. I like the album as a whole, but those three are the standouts for me. So he starts the song by saying, well, singing, but I'm just going to say saying, "The years have passed so quickly. One thing I've understood, I am only learning to tell the trees from wood." Okay, so right there, he's starting with some sentimentality, I would say, or nostalgia. This has got to be somebody he's got somewhat of a long-term relationship with. Again, let's imagine it's Paul. So, the Beatles went by in a blur, and even since their breakup, it's passing so fast. And he says, I'm just realizing that I'm able to see the bigger picture. Then he says, I know what's coming down, and I know where it's coming from. And I know, and I'm sorry, yes I am, but I never could speak my mind. Okay, now this is a little bit enigmatic, hard to prease out exactly what this means. There's some ambiguity here. Is he talking about what's coming down, in terms of like what's next in history, in sort of world affairs? Is he talking about what's coming down for their relationship? Not sure, but maybe when he say I know what's coming down and I know where it's coming from, maybe he's referencing their divisiveness in the last couple of years, because then he says, and I know, and I'm sorry, yes I am. So that's very direct. That would be the kind of thing we could imagine him easily saying to Yoko. But as I said before, I mean, if this is to Paul, that's quite a vulnerable statement from John. And he says, but I never could speak my mind. And I think Paul has referenced that. It's like you're buddies with somebody, you're guys. You don't necessarily, get vulnerable with each other. By the way, another thing that Ian Leslie mentions in here is that when Paul first did LSD with John, apparently there was a moment where he locked eyes with John and they sort of just said, quote unquote, I know, man. So the fact that this song is called I Know could be related to that, according to Ian Leslie. Okay, so now in the song he says, and I know just how you feel. And I know now what I have done. And I know, and I'm guilty, yes I am, but I never could read your mind. So here he could be referencing the How Do You Sleep song itself. And I mean, he was a tough guy, but I could imagine there was possibly some element of regret in writing such a harsh piece to his old buddy. And as he said, I could never speak my mind earlier. Now he says, I could never read your mind. So again, it's that guy thing, where, like Paul says, it's like you're sort of war buddies, and there's a closeness, yes, but it's not like you're bearing your soul to each other either. So he goes on, he says, I know what I was missing, but now my eyes can see. I put myself in your place as you did for me. So again, if this is to Paul, that's quite a nice sentiment. Maybe he's saying, I'm imagining how you must have felt receiving my attacks. And, as you did for me. I'm not sure exactly what that means, but maybe he's referencing the Dear Friend song there, where Paul's, trying to connect with John. And then he comes out and he says, today I love you more than yesterday. So the yesterday there being that first lyrical, very suspicious word where you kind of have a hard time believing John wasn't thinking of Paul there. That's Paul's probably most famous song. John would say sometimes that people would congratulate him for yesterday, or tell him how much they love yesterday, and he would have to say, well, I didn't write that one. So, but and he had kind of said that Paul hasn't done anything since yesterday in the How Do You Sleep song. But here, I love you more than yesterday. Right now, I love you more right now. So if that is to Paul, that is really very sweet and very vulnerable and just quite noble of John to be willing to go there in this song, and then it kind of reminds you of Paul's Here Today on the Tug of War album after John was killed. And Paul also directly says, I love you in that song. Interesting to think John did it first, almost a decade earlier. Now he says, I know what's coming down. I can feel where it's coming from. And I know it's getting better all the time. And we share in each other's mind. So there again, you heard that second, now this time it's a couple words together, or a phrase, getting better all the time. Come on now. That is a direct lift from, of course, the song Getting Better from the Sgt. Pepper album that Paul basically wrote, but John helped with some of the lyrics there. So he's saying our relationship is getting better all the time. Life is getting better all the time as we share in each other's mind. So somehow this thawing of the ice, this breaking of the tension in their relationship, and John is feeling like there's a connection again, and we see each other in some way. And maybe he's even saying, I feel now, given what all that we've gone through, that I share in your mind now maybe more than ever. I have a certain clarity that maybe I didn't have before. Today I love you more than yesterday. Right now I love you more right now. And then he ends by saying, oh, no more crying, etc. So there you have it. Again, this would be quite out of character for John to be so vulnerable with his friend. Over the years, so much negativity that he would spew, whether about Paul directly or just about his, some of his music. Even in the 1980 Playboy interviews, where he goes through a lot of the songs, he's not always really very complimentary of Paul's stuff, and he's very dismissive, in fact, about a lot of it. Not all of it, but a lot of it. So somehow this moment in time in 1973 when he wrote this must have caught him at a sentimental moment, a nostalgic moment, and he captured that, and he ran with that, and he never admitted publicly that this was to Paul, and maybe that's all the better. It's like those who know will know, and I think he expected Paul to get it. Now, we do know that their relationship did become closer because Paul goes out to visit John in Los Angeles in 1974 when he's working on the rock and roll album, or hanging out with Harry Nilsson and all that. And in fact, Paul brings a message from Yoko saying, you can come back if you work at it, and if you show me you've really changed. And then we know there's that 1976 meeting where they sitting around watching Saturday Night Live and in John's apartment in New York City, and they think about going down there and showing up at the show, but they don't. So it's not to say that they didn't have still some remaining tensions, but there was a period there certainly of a thawing and a reconnecting of them both. And one other thing, there is talk, May Pang has said, in fact, that John was planning to join Paul for the sessions in New Orleans for what became the Venus and Mars album. He eventually didn't go because he got back with Yoko and just kind of settled into that situation in New York. But up until that happened, Paul was expecting him, and John was really looking forward to going down there and hanging out with Paul and probably playing together on the album. So, yeah, putting it all together, it's really not out of the question that this wonderful song was written for Paul McCartney. And if it was, I think it is a beautiful thing and beautiful to ponder. What does it matter in the grand scheme of things? Of course, who knows? But for Beatle fans and Beatle lovers, and even Beatle content creators, it's something interesting, and I find it fascinating, and it just makes me love this song even more to think that this was John's message to Paul. So there you have it. Thanks for watching. Give us your comments below. Please like this video, and I'd love to have you subscribe to my channel. Take care till next time, folks.